John Fitzgerald is in from Callan. How are you, John?
Not so bad, Emer.
I'm used to reading your letters in the paper. You're always a busy man. You're not shy of putting pen to paper.
Well, I've written a fair few letters over the years and articles on various subjects and issues and all that.
Right, so you've just published a novel, Time to Stop Running.
I have, yeah. Now, previously I'd published a number of non-fiction books about Callan, Kilkenny, history and heritage and all that, but this time I've published a novel, and I had intended it to be sort of for teenage readers, but you know, when you begin to write, it takes on a life of its own, and I decided to more or less broaden it out, so I see it as sort of a fantasy adventure for all ages. And the title is Time to Stop Running. It tells the story of, I know this is going to sound far-fetched, but that's the whole idea really, of a hare called Tipsy who lives on an island off the shore of Ireland. And he's getting on quite happily with all the other hares, but then he discovers he's psychic. And that's a big culture shock to him and all the other hares and all that. But then an even bigger shock is when a few months later boats arrive from the mainland, and these hares have never seen humans before, and a number of them are captured and taken to the mainland, which is to Ireland, and that caused a big upheaval. Now, Tipsy is not one of them, but he's summoned to the cave of the golden hare, who's the spiritual leader of all the hares on the island, and this golden hare assigns Tipsy a mission, which is, his mission is the next time the humans come in the boats to capture hares, he's to allow himself to be captured so he can join them on the mainland and cause
get the inside story,
and get the inside story and infiltrate them and be a bit of a 007 type, and so then this happens. He's taken to the mainland with other hares, but unlike the other hares, he has these magical powers. He can make himself invisible and this, that, and he can communicate with all other creatures, whereas other hares can only communicate with hares. So when he arrives on the mainland, he's basically taken by people who he wouldn't know it, but they're a coursing club which capture hares from all parts of the country and occasionally from islands when hares become scarce around the country. But he manages to escape from the coursing club, but then after escaping he has many more adventures all across Ireland, and he meets other creatures like the badger and the fox and a temperamental cat who happens to be in somebody's garden and all this type of thing. And there are two other Tipsy the hare is the main character, but there are two human characters as well, just to make the story a bit more interesting. One is a fellow called Waxy. He's the secretary of Ballycrossways Coursing Club. Now, that's a fictional coursing club, it's not a real one. And the other is a woman called Anne-Marie Christabel, who's an anti-coursing activist. So I just tried to bring the two sides in, even though I'm not very objective on the subject, because I've been involved in the anti-hare coursing campaign. But as far as I'm capable, I've built up this character of this coursing club secretary, and he's at odds with the anti-coursing person. And Tipsy the hare comes across both of them in the novel, and I won't give too much away, but it's it turns out it's a bit of an adventure.
This would give Peter Rabbit, I'd say,
it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit along the lines of many years ago I read Watership Down, and many people as children read Watership Down, and even though it's a book for children, apparently many children had nightmares when they read Watership Down because of the rabbits get into all kinds of strange situations, and so in this book, this is a kind of a Watership Down for hares, if I could put it that way. So instead of rabbits having adventures, you have hares, the adventures basically of Irish hares. I don't think anybody has written a book yet about the adventures of the fictional adventures of an Irish hare, whatever about Bugs Bunny and so on.
Tell me about the Irish hare, because a lot of us, we don't know a huge amount about it. You've spent the biggest part of your life campaigning for the protection of the Irish hare. Yeah, that's right. And in fact, I've been involved for 4 decades, and even for a good portion of that 4 decades, there were things I wasn't aware of in relation to the Irish hare. And it's an interesting thing. You might think hares the world over are the same, but they're not. I mean, in Britain predominantly has the brown hare, which is actually quite different from our hare. Ours is more of actually, if I can say, a more pleasant colour, sort of a russet brown. Although there are, to digress a bit, there are 2 hares on Rathlin Island called golden hares. They're actually genetic mutants. They're albino hares with blue eyes, and that's where I got the idea for the golden hare, who's the spiritual leader of the hares on the island. But anyway, the Irish hare is unique to Ireland. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's a subspecies of another type of hare, the mountain hare. Now, the mountain hare is interesting enough, but the Irish hare is a subspecies of the mountain hare, and it's been around since at least before the last ice age of 10,000 years ago, but maybe 50,000 years before that, but at least. So there were these particular hares were roaming the country before there were any
human beings, let alone coursing clubs or anti-coursing people or whatever. But
where did you get the graw for the hare? You know, the desire to protect the Irish
mainly
hare?
Just from
what drives
walks.
That?
I used to walk going back way into the early part of my life, and I just saw them. Now, very, very rarely, because you don't see them too often. Now, they're scarce. They're not as scarce. They weren't as scarce 40 or 50 years ago as they are now. But you don't tend to see them as often as you see a rabbit or a bird. And you know, in fact, there's a major book on nature was produced about a year ago. I won't mention the name, but every single species of animal in Ireland is in the book, except the hare for some reason. But anyway, unfortunately, the bad news about the hare is that over the past half century, the Irish hare has been in decline. There are less of them. Now, they're not on the brink of extinction, but they are under a lot of pressure, and mainly just due to loss of habitat, which happens from the cities expanding, urbanisation and intensive farming and various other things, but also as a result of hunting, poaching, and the activities of coursing clubs. Now, I'm not actually blaming any one of those, but it's all these factors combined. Now, I've been involved in a campaign against hare coursing, mainly on animal welfare grounds. The conservation side of it is quite different. But now the hare has reached a point where, you know, any kind of pressure really doesn't help the situation. And there's another possible danger on the horizon. The brown hare in Britain could possibly be at risk of myxomatosis, which used to only affect rabbits, but many experts, wildlife experts, fear that myxomatosis in Britain has made a kind of a species jump from the rabbit to the hare.
Right.
And we've got to hope and pray that doesn't come here as well.
There
are
threats as
well. So really, we think apart from the issues of like what I've been involved in, the anti-hare coursing campaign, apart from that and the animal welfare or cruelty issues, the hare needs to be looked after. Maybe farmers need to set aside a bit of land, and people need to take care, I suppose, not run over them in cars or where possible, just have a little bit of land that's suitable for hares. For example, hares need land that has long grass. If the grass is short, to a hare that's like being in a desert, you know. So there is that. Like the hares, they love the long grass and vegetation.
We see less of that these days,
and there's far less of it. And they tend to be attracted to airports quite a lot, which is unfortunate because sometimes they get sucked into the engines and there are other issues.
Why is that?
They have a thing about it can be actually in the case of Dublin Airport. In the case of Dublin Airport, it's the long grass, again, that I mentioned that attracts them. Now, there was a theory that they're attracted by the humming of the engines or something as well.
Okay.
That's a possibility, but it's mainly the long grass and the stretches of grass around airports and all that.
Okay.
But there again, now, whatever people's opinions are on blood sports, I think very few people would like to see the hare disappear completely from Ireland. So, hopefully, conservation groups and everybody, farmers and
even a little awareness as you're doing is good for the
stewardship
Irish hare.
of the country. So actually, in the book itself, I'm kind of hoping, although it's fiction, I'm hoping that it'll contribute to the ongoing debate about the Irish hare and maybe get people thinking about how, as a species, we're kind of endangering the planet. I suppose that's an overstated case, but we all know about the danger the planet is in and all that. So it's not just the hare, it's the polar bears, but
all our creatures.
But just as the polar bear is endangered in the Antarctic or whatever the regions, the Irish hare is very much at risk. And so I'm hoping that this book, because of what it deals with, even though it's fiction, that it will get people to reflect. There's actually a court case, I won't give too much away, about a third of the way through the book that sort of raises indirectly all these issues about conservation and animal cruelty and what's cruel and what isn't cruel, and to try and focus on the fact that nobody can get inside the mind of a hare. And of course I'm just
you were trying to kind of get inside the mind of a hare.
I'm to some extent attempting to get inside the mind of a hare, but the one thing we do know is that whatever was on the hare's head, he doesn't want to disappear from sight. He wants to be around 50 years from now, you know.
That's
it. And there are also one or two dodgy politicians in it who are not based on any real life politicians, I want to state.
Okay, before you get the raft of solicitors' letters.
There won't be any live actions over this book, I can tell you, because it's well and truly
fiction, folks.
Vetted for that. That's a very important thing when writing fiction. It's amazing how easy it is to slip into.
Somebody might think that you're talking about them.
You've got to be 10 times removed from any real person, even in terms of description. Well, that's the best advice from
okay.
The writing groups and all
we'll
that.
let people know, John, before we go, where can they get the book if they're listening and they think...
The best time, it may come into the shops after a while, but right now the best way to get it is to order it from Amazon, and the best outlet is Amazon UK, because it's the nearest to Ireland.
For the postage and that.
It's delivered immediately. Now, it's, 4 days or something like that, and very low postage, but shipping costs. Also, it's available as an e-book. Now, the paperback costs £12.33 sterling, which is about €16. But the e-book costs, I actually kept it as low as you can actually have an e-book on Amazon, which is about €1.20. So for €1.20 you can download the e-book immediately. Also, without downloading anything or making any commitment, you can read the first 13 chapters of the book on Amazon, that's of the e-book, by just pressing on it. Says, look inside, and you can just read.
Anyone can preview it.
The first 13 chapters, which is quite a good sizable extract.
Good stuff, and you'll have people hooked by then. John, somebody on WhatsApp, a listener, says, would you agree that large birds, now common in the country, are having an effect on young hares?
Oh, I would. The hare has always had, predators, and in the book, actually, the hare on the island doesn't have many predators, but one of them is actually a falcon. There are 1 or 2 falcons, and there are buzzards as well that take leverets and all that. But I think we should never make the mistake of blaming these predators too much, because they don't really have a huge impact. Loss of habitat plays a far bigger part than predators like the falcon and the buzzard and other.
And
like
they
foxes
need to survive too, isn't that?
But they need to survive. But some leverets will be taken by these birds of prey. But actually, the ones that survive, the hares that survive, can they develop survival skills, and they can really run very fast, and they can turn and dodge and twist, which of course you see on the coursing field, unfortunately. And I'm not, the fact is, many of them, the reason coursing people want hares in coursing is because they perform so well and so brilliantly, whereas the reason people like myself object is that we say, well, you could have a mechanical lure instead of the live hare, and you could have just the same fun and games, but they don't agree with me on that, many of them.
Okay, well, John Fitzgerald, thank you very much for coming in and telling us about Time to Stop Running. It's a real adventure story, as you describe. It's a work of fiction, and people can get it on Amazon. Thanks a million, John.
Thanks very much.